"If you touch that piano, I'll marry you." The millionaire mocked, but the janitor played like a genius. Victoria Sterling stood in the marble foyer of her Manhattan penthouse, her champagne flute trembling with barely contained rage as she surveyed the disaster that her evening's entertainment had become when the renowned pianist she'd hired for $30,000 had called in sick mere hours before her charity gala was set to begin. "This is absolutely unacceptable." Victoria shrieked at her personal assistant Margaret, her voice echoing off the imported Italian marble while 200 of New York's elite waited in her grand ballroom. "I specifically told the agency that tonight's performance was crucial for impressing the board members who will decide on my appointment to the Metropolitan Arts Council." Her pharmaceutical fortune had bought her entrance into high society, but acceptance remained elusive despite her desperate attempts to prove her cultural sophistication through expensive art acquisitions and elaborate social events. "I've contacted every available pianist in the city," Margaret replied nervously, "but it's Saturday night and everyone of your caliber is already booked. Perhaps we could arrange for recorded music." Victoria's laugh was sharp as broken crystal. Recorded music? At a gathering where Senator Williams and Ambassador Chen are expecting to witness artistic excellence? "I'd rather die than admit defeat to those cultural vultures who already whisper that new money can't buy true refinement." As if summoned by her hysteria, the soft sound of piano music began drifting from the direction of the ballroom, causing Victoria to freeze mid-rant as she recognized the opening notes of Chopin's Nocturne in E-flat major being played with a sensitivity and technical mastery that seemed impossible given their current circumstances. Victoria rushed toward the sound with Margaret trailing behind, her Louboutin heels clicking against the marble like machine gunfire as she prepared to discover which of her guests had dared to touch her prized Steinway concert grand without permission. The scene that greeted her in the ballroom doorway defied every assumption she had made about talent, class, and the invisible barriers that supposedly separated the cultured elite from common working people. At her piano sat James Rodriguez, the night janitor she'd barely acknowledged during his 2 years of employment, his weathered hands moving across the keys with the fluid grace of someone who had spent decades perfecting his craft rather than someone whose job description involved emptying trash cans and mopping floors. The gathering of socialites, politicians, and business moguls stood transfixed by the music flowing from his fingers, their conversations silenced by the unexpected encounter with genuine artistry in an environment where purchased culture usually masqueraded as authentic talent. "What the hell do you think you're doing?" Victoria demanded, her voice cracking with disbelief as James continued playing, seemingly unaware of the storm gathering behind his focused concentration. "Get away from my piano immediately before you damage it." But even as she spoke, Victoria found herself mesmerized by the technical precision and emotional depth of James's performance, which surpassed anything she had heard from the expensive professionals she usually hired to impress her guests with demonstrations of cultural sophistication that felt hollow compared to the raw authenticity emanating from this unexpected source. The confrontation that Victoria had intended escalated into something far more complex when James finally looked up from the piano keys, his dark eyes meeting her furious gaze with calm dignity that seemed to deflate her rage while simultaneously intensifying her confusion about how her assumptions about talent and social hierarchy had been so thoroughly demolished. "Mrs. Sterling," James said quietly, his accent carrying traces of his Puerto Rican heritage, "I apologize for the presumption, but I heard your distress about the cancelled performance and thought perhaps I could help until you found a suitable replacement." His explanation was delivered with respectful humility that somehow made Victoria feel small and petty rather than righteously indignant, while their guests continued to stare in fascination at the unfolding drama between the millionaire pharmaceutical heiress and the janitor who played classical piano like he'd been trained at Juilliard. "Help!" Victoria sputtered, her worldview reeling as she struggled to reconcile the sophisticated musician she'd just heard with the invisible service worker she'd been employing for 2 years without ever really seeing him as a complete human being. "You're a janitor. How could you possibly know how to play Chopin at a professional level?" The question hung in the air like an accusation, revealing the depth of her assumptions about the relationship between economic status and artistic ability, while James's gentle smile suggested that her narrow understanding of human potential was about to be challenged in ways that would force her to confront uncomfortable truths about talent, opportunity, and the prejudices that shape her perception of the people around her. The revelation of James's background began to unfold as he responded to Victoria's incredulous questioning with a dignity and grace that made her inflammatory assumptions about his capabilities seem increasingly petty and ignorant. "Mrs. Sterling, I studied piano at the Conservatory of Music in San Juan for 8 years before I moved to New York," James explained, his voice carrying the quiet authority of someone who had lived with extraordinary talent while circumstances forced him into work that bore no relationship to his training or passion. I came here 15 years ago hoping to build a career as a classical pianist, but the music world is challenging for someone without connections or financial backing to support years of auditions and unpaid performances while waiting for opportunities that might never come. His words painted a picture of artistic dreams deferred by economic necessity, forcing Victoria to confront the reality that exceptional talent often went unrecognized because it existed in people whose social and economic circumstances prevented them from accessing the platforms where such abilities could be displayed and appreciated. I've continued practicing and composing during my off hours, James continued, because music isn't something you can abandon just because life requires you to earn a living in other ways. Tonight, when I heard that your performer had cancelled and saw how upset you were, I thought perhaps my years of study might finally serve a purpose beyond my own personal fulfillment. The quiet pride in his voice as he described maintaining his artistic development despite working as a janitor challenged Victoria's assumptions about the relationship between visible success and genuine accomplishment. The audience of elite guests who had witnessed this unexpected encounter began to respond with enthusiasm that surpassed anything Victoria had seen during her previous attempts to impress them with expensive cultural programming, their genuine appreciation for James's artistry creating the kind of authentic engagement that her purchased entertainment had never achieved. "That was absolutely extraordinary," declared Senator Williams as he approached the piano with obvious excitement. "I haven't heard Chopin played with that level of sensitivity and technical mastery since my last visit to Carnegie Hall. Mr." The request for James's name represented a moment of social recognition that Victoria had never offered during his 2 years of employment, highlighting how her own prejudices had prevented her from seeing him as a complete person worthy of basic human courtesy and interest. "Rodriguez, sir." "James Rodriguez," came the reply, delivered with humble pride as James rose from the piano bench to accept the senator's extended hand. "Mr. Rodriguez, have you recorded any of your performances? Do you have representation?" Senator Williams continued, his questions reflecting genuine interest in James's career prospects rather than mere polite social conversation. Victoria watched in amazement as her guests began engaging with James as an artist and individual rather than invisible service staff, their recognition of his talent creating the kind of authentic cultural moment that all her expensive efforts had failed to produce. The irony wasn't lost on her that the most successful cultural event she had ever hosted was happening spontaneously around a man she had never bothered to really notice or value beyond his utility in maintaining her physical environment. The marriage proposal that Victoria had mockingly thrown out as an impossible condition became the focal point of increasingly intense scrutiny as her guests began to realize the implications of her earlier statement and James's extraordinary demonstration of musical genius. "Victoria, darling," said Countess Elena Vasquez with barely contained amusement, "didn't I hear you say something about marriage if this gentleman could play your piano? That was quite a dramatic promise to make, especially given what we've just witnessed." The reminder of her impulsive words sent a chill through Victoria's champagne-warmed consciousness as she realized that her attempt to mock what she had assumed would be amateur fumbling had instead created a public commitment that her sophisticated guests were now treating as a serious matter requiring follow-through. "That was obviously hyperbole," Victoria replied weakly, her voice lacking the conviction that usually characterized her pronouncements about social and business matters. "I never expected. I mean, who could have anticipated?" Her words trailed off as she realized that her attempts to explain away her promise only highlighted the prejudices that had led her to make such a statement in the first place, assuming that a janitor could never possess the kind of extraordinary talent that would make her words anything more than cruel mockery. "Mrs. Sterling," James said quietly, his tone carrying neither expectation nor reproach, "I have no intention of holding you to words spoken in surprise and frustration. I played tonight because I wanted to help, not to create obligations or complications for anyone." His gracious response to her obvious discomfort somehow made Victoria feel even smaller, revealing a character and dignity that exceeded anything she had encountered in her usual circles of wealthy but often shallow social connections. The transformation of the evening from disaster to triumph created a social dynamic that forced Victoria to confront fundamental questions about her values, her prejudices, and her understanding of what constituted genuine worth versus superficial status markers that had shaped her worldview since inheriting her pharmaceutical fortune. "James, would you be willing to play something else for us?" asked Ambassador Chen, his request reflecting the genuine appreciation that had replaced the polite tolerance that usually characterized responses to Victoria's cultural programming. "Perhaps something of your own composition." The suggestion that James might have created original music opened new dimensions of artistic respect that Victoria had never considered possible for someone she had categorized simply as service staff rather than a complete human being with talents, dreams, and creative capabilities that rivaled or exceeded those of the expensive performers she typically hired to impress her social circle. As James returned to the piano and began playing an original composition that combined classical technique with contemporary harmonies and Latin rhythmic influences, Victoria found herself experiencing music with an emotional authenticity that her purchased cultural experiences had never provided. The piece spoke of yearning, resilience, displaced dreams, and ultimate hope in ways that seemed to tell the story of James's life while transcending personal narrative to address universal human experiences that resonated with everyone in the room regardless of their social or economic status. The standing ovation that followed was unlike anything Victoria had ever witnessed at her events. Spontaneous, enthusiastic, and completely genuine rather than the polite applause that usually greeted her expensive but soulless entertainment choices. The depth of James Rodriguez's musical education began to emerge as Victoria's guests peppered him with questions that revealed a level of training and sophistication that challenged every assumption she had made about the relationship between visible social status and actual artistic accomplishment. Mr. Rodriguez, your interpretation of the Chopin piece showed remarkable understanding of the composer's emotional intentions, observed Dr. Patricia Martinelli, a musicologist from Columbia University who had attended Victoria's gala as a guest of the university's board of directors. Did you study the historical context and performance practice traditions associated with that particular nocturne? James's response demonstrated knowledge that surpassed what Victoria typically encountered even among the expensive performers she hired for her cultural events. Yes, Dr. Martinelli, I spent considerable time researching the circumstances of Chopin's composition during his relationship with George Sand, and I've studied recordings of Arthur Rubinstein, Vladimir Ashkenazy, and Murray Perahia to understand different interpretive approaches to the emotional narrative embedded in the piece. His ability to discuss musical scholarship and performance history at an academic level forced Victoria to confront the reality that she had been employing someone whose intellectual and artistic capabilities far exceeded her own understanding of the cultural subjects she used to establish her social credentials. I've also studied the manuscript variations and editorial choices made by different publishers, James continued, because I believe that understanding the composer's original intentions is crucial for developing an authentic interpretation rather than just reproducing conventional performance traditions. The sophistication of his musical knowledge made Victoria realize that her own appreciation of classical music was superficial compared to the deep understanding that James had developed through serious study and passionate engagement with the art form. The revelation of James's compositional abilities opened new dimensions of artistic respect, as he began sharing original works that demonstrated not just technical proficiency but creative vision that addressed contemporary themes through classical musical language. This piece I'm about to play is called Displacement Suite, James explained as he prepared to perform another original composition, and it explores the emotional journey of immigrants who leave their homeland seeking opportunities while carrying the music and memories of their culture into new environments where they must find ways to honor their heritage while adapting to unfamiliar circumstances. The music that followed was unlike anything Victoria had heard at her cultural events, technically sophisticated but emotionally accessible, rooted in classical tradition but infused with contemporary relevance that spoke to universal human experiences of loss, adaptation, and hope. The piece incorporated elements of Puerto Rican folk melodies woven into complex harmonies that required advanced technical skills while maintaining emotional coherence that connected with listeners regardless of their musical training or cultural background. James, this is absolutely extraordinary, whispered Ambassador Chen as the music unfolded. You're creating original work that bridges cultural traditions while addressing contemporary social issues through purely instrumental means. Have you considered seeking publishers or performance opportunities for these compositions? The question highlighted how James's artistic vision had been constrained by circumstances that prevented his work from reaching audiences capable of appreciating and supporting his creative development, while Victoria began to understand that she had been unknowingly employing someone whose artistic contributions could have significant cultural value if given appropriate platforms and recognition. The technical mastery that James displayed as he performed increasingly complex pieces revealed training and discipline that Victoria had never encountered even among the expensive professionals she typically hired to provide cultural programming for her social events. Mr. Rodriguez, your technique is absolutely flawless, observed Maestro Giovanni Torelli, conductor of the New York Philharmonic who had attended the gala as Victoria's special guest, particularly your pedal work and dynamic control in the more delicate passages. Where did you study piano technique specifically? James's answer revealed the depth of his formal musical education. I was fortunate to study with Professor Maria Santos at the Conservatory of Music in San Juan, who had trained at Juilliard under Rosina Levin before returning to Puerto Rico to establish the conservatory's piano program. She insisted on rigorous technical foundation work, 4 hours daily of scales, etudes, and finger exercises, before allowing students to work on repertoire pieces. The revelation that James had studied under a professor with Juilliard credentials challenged Victoria's assumptions about the quality of musical education available outside the elite institutions she associated with serious artistic training. Professor Santos also required us to study music theory, composition, and music history as integral parts of piano performance, James continued, because she believed that technical ability without intellectual and cultural understanding produced mechanical rather than artistic performances. She often said that the hands can only express what the mind understands and the heart feels. His description of comprehensive musical education made Victoria realize that her own appreciation of classical music was limited compared to the deep understanding that James had developed through years of serious study that approached music as both technical discipline and cultural expression. The performance opportunities that James had been denied because of economic circumstances began to emerge as he described the career challenges that had led him from conservatory training to janitorial work, highlighting systemic barriers that prevented talented individuals from accessing platforms where their abilities could be recognized and developed. After completing my studies at the conservatory, I moved to New York with hopes of building a performance career, James explained to the fascinated audience of Victoria's guests, but I quickly discovered that classical music careers require financial support that allows artists to spend years auditioning, networking, and performing for little or no compensation while building the relationships and reputation necessary for steady professional work. His description of the classical music industry's economic realities forced Victoria to confront how her own wealth had allowed her to purchase access to cultural experiences without understanding the financial barriers that prevented talented artists from sharing their gifts with wider audiences. I spent 3 years trying to survive on occasional performance fees while working part-time jobs to pay rent and maintain my piano practice, James continued. But eventually I had to choose between pursuing an uncertain musical career or accepting steady employment that would allow me to support myself while continuing to develop artistically during my personal time. The choice that circumstances had forced upon James highlighted how economic necessity often prevented exceptional talent from flourishing, while Victoria began to understand that her role as a patron of the arts could involve more than just purchasing entertainment for her own social advancement. The creative process that James described as he composed original works while working as a janitor revealed an artistic dedication that transcended the limitations imposed by his employment circumstances, demonstrating how genuine artistic passion could flourish even when external conditions seemed to discourage creative development. I usually compose late at night after finishing my janitorial duties, James explained, when the building is quiet and I can use the employee break room piano without disturbing anyone. The solitude actually helps my creative process, because I can experiment with musical ideas without worrying about whether they meet anyone else's expectations or commercial requirements. His description of composing in isolation while surrounded by the mundane realities of his day job created a romantic image that appealed to Victoria's guests more than any of the expensive cultural programming she had previously arranged. Some of my best compositions have been inspired by the contrast between the elegant environments I clean and maintain during the day and the modest circumstances of my own life, James continued, because that juxtaposition helps me understand themes of aspiration, dignity, and the universal human desire to create beauty regardless of external circumstances. The artistic vision he described elevated his janitorial work from mere economic necessity to source material for creative expression that addressed social and economic disparities through musical metaphor rather than political rhetoric. The recognition that James received from Victoria's sophisticated guests represented the kind of artistic validation that had been denied to him throughout his career attempts, creating opportunities for professional development that his previous circumstances had made impossible to access. James, I'd like to discuss commissioning an original composition for our fall benefit concert, said Dr. Sarah Chen, president of the Manhattan Arts Foundation, and I think you should also consider applying for our artist residency program, which provides studio space, living stipend, and performance opportunities for emerging composers. Her offer represented the kind of institutional support that could transform James's artistic career from personal hobby to professional recognition, while Victoria watched in amazement as her guests competed to offer opportunities that could change his life circumstances entirely. Mr. Rodriguez, would you be interested in discussing a recording contract for your original compositions? Asked Michael Torres, a music industry executive who had been impressed enough by the impromptu performance to see commercial potential in James's work. I think there's a significant market for classical compositions that incorporate contemporary cultural themes, and your work seems to bridge traditional and modern sensibilities in ways that could appeal to diverse audiences. The multiple professional opportunities that emerged from a single evening's performance highlighted how talent recognition could create rapid career transformation when the right audience encountered exceptional abilities in appropriate settings, while Victoria began to understand how her social connections could serve purposes beyond her own status enhancement. The evening's conclusion brought Victoria face to face with decisions that would define her character and values far beyond the superficial social positioning that had previously motivated her cultural activities, forcing her to choose between maintaining comfortable prejudices and embracing uncomfortable truths about human worth and artistic value. "Mrs. Sterling," James said as the guests began departing and the excitement of discovery settled into quieter reflection, "I want to thank you for allowing me to share my music tonight, even though the circumstances were unexpected for both of us. This evening has given me hope that my years of practice and composition might eventually find appropriate audiences and opportunities." His gracious acknowledgement of her inadvertent role in his artistic breakthrough made Victoria feel simultaneously proud of the outcome and ashamed of the prejudices that had nearly prevented it from occurring. "James," Victoria replied, her voice carrying uncharacteristic vulnerability, "I owe you an apology for my initial reaction and for never taking the time to know you as a person during the 2 years you've worked for me. Tonight has shown me that I've been blind to the remarkable individual I've had the privilege of employing, and I'm embarrassed by how my assumptions prevented me from recognizing your extraordinary talents." Her admission represented a fundamental shift in how she understood the relationship between social status and human worth, while James's gentle smile suggested that his artistic success was enhanced rather than diminished by her newfound respect and recognition of his humanity beyond his utilitarian function as service provider. The morning after the gala brought Victoria face to face with the social and personal implications of her impulsive marriage proposal, as news of the evening's dramatic events spread throughout New York's elite circles with the speed and embellishment that characterized high society gossip. "Victoria, darling, everyone is talking about your romantic piano proposal," declared Countess Elena Vasquez during their regular morning phone call, her voice bubbling with amusement that Victoria found distinctly uncomfortable given her sobered perspective on the previous night's events. "The story is becoming quite legendary. The millionaire heiress who discovered true love through her janitor's musical genius. How absolutely divine and unconventional." The romanticized version of events that were circulating through their social network bore little resemblance to Victoria's actual experience, which had been more about confronting her own prejudices than discovering romantic passion, though she was beginning to realize that the distinction might be less important than the fact that her public commitment was being taken seriously by people whose opinions could affect her social standing. "Elena, that was obviously not a serious proposal," Victoria protested weakly. "It was just an expression of surprise at an unexpected situation." But even as she spoke, Victoria could hear the lack of conviction in her own voice as she grappled with the reality that her words had created expectations among her peers that would be difficult to dismiss without appearing shallow, cruel, or lacking in personal integrity that she had spent years trying to establish within New York's cultural elite. The business implications of Victoria's potential marriage to James began to surface as her board of directors and major shareholders started expressing concerns about how a relationship with a janitor might affect the pharmaceutical company's reputation and her own credibility as a corporate leader. "Victoria, we need to discuss the potential impact of your personal decisions on Sterling Pharmaceuticals' public image," said Richard Morrison, her chief financial officer, during an emergency executive meeting that she hadn't requested but that had apparently been deemed necessary by her leadership team. "Our stock price could be affected if investors perceive instability in your personal life or question your judgment based on unconventional relationship choices." The barely concealed condescension in his voice made Victoria realize that her own employees viewed her potential relationship with James through the same class-based prejudices that had initially shaped her reaction to his musical abilities, forcing her to confront how deeply embedded social hierarchies influenced even business relationships and professional evaluations. "Richard, are you suggesting that my personal relationships should be subject to corporate approval?" Victoria replied with ice in her voice. "Or are you implying that James Rodriguez's character and abilities are somehow insufficient to warrant respect regardless of his current employment status?" Her questions forced her executive team to articulate prejudices that sounded increasingly unreasonable when stated explicitly, while Victoria began to understand that defending her relationship with James would require challenging the same social assumptions that had shaped her own worldview until the previous evening. The media attention that Victoria's situation began attracting transformed a private social drama into a public commentary on class, talent, and social mobility that exceeded anything she had experienced during her business career or philanthropic activities. "Millionaire pharmaceutical heiress falls for musical janitor," read the headline in the New York Post Society section, accompanied by photographs of Victoria and James that had been taken at the gala by society photographers who specialized in capturing moments that could later become significant news stories. "Victoria Sterling's Cinderella story, but who's the real prince?" asked the Times social columnist, framing the relationship as a fairy tale reversal that challenged traditional narratives about wealth, class, and romantic compatibility. The articles portrayed James as a romantic figure whose hidden talents had swept a wealthy woman off her feet, while Victoria found herself cast in the unfamiliar role of someone whose privilege was being questioned rather than envied or admired. Ms. Sterling's discovery of love through artistic appreciation suggests that genuine connection can transcend economic boundaries, wrote one commentator, though critics question whether such relationships can survive the practical challenges of dramatically different social and financial circumstances. The public scrutiny of her private feelings forced Victoria to examine her own motivations and intentions in ways that her previous relationships with wealthy, socially appropriate men had never required, while she began to understand that her choice would be interpreted as a statement about values and social justice rather than merely personal preference. The conversations with James that followed the media attention revealed depths of character and intellectual sophistication that challenged Victoria's remaining assumptions about the relationship between formal education, social polish, and genuine wisdom or moral insight. "Mrs. Sterling," James said during their first private conversation since the gala, "I want you to know that I never intended for my musical performance to create complications or pressure regarding your personal life. If the attention is causing problems for you professionally or socially, I'm prepared to clarify publicly that there are no romantic expectations or commitments between us." His willingness to protect her reputation at potential cost to his own newly discovered opportunities demonstrated a generosity and selflessness that Victoria had rarely encountered in her usual social circles, where personal advancement typically took precedence over concern for others' well-being. "James, the question isn't about protecting my reputation," Victoria replied, surprised by her own honesty. "It's about whether I have the courage to pursue something that feels authentic instead of maintaining relationships that serve social and business purposes but lack genuine emotional connection." Her admission represented a level of vulnerability that her wealth and status had previously made unnecessary, while James's thoughtful response suggested that he understood the implications of her choice better than she did herself. "Victoria, if I may call you that," James said gently, "I think the question isn't whether you can afford to take a chance on an unconventional relationship, but whether you can afford not to pursue the kind of connection that makes you feel like the best version of yourself rather than just the most successful version." The family reactions to Victoria's potential relationship with James revealed dynamics and prejudices that forced her to confront how her wealth had isolated her from authentic relationships, while surrounding her with people whose primary interest was her financial resources rather than her personal growth or happiness. "Victoria, have you lost your mind?" demanded her brother Michael during a heated phone conversation. "You can't seriously be considering marriage to a janitor when you could have your pick of successful men who could enhance rather than complicate your social and business position." His reaction reflected the transactional approach to relationships that had characterized Victoria's family's attitude toward marriage and partnership, viewing romantic connections primarily as strategic alliances rather than emotional bonds based on mutual respect and genuine compatibility. "Michael, James Rodriguez is an extraordinarily talented musician and composer who happens to work as a janitor," Victoria replied, "and has shown more integrity and kindness in one evening than most of the successful men I've dated have demonstrated during months of relationship." Her defense of James forced her to articulate values that she hadn't realized she possessed, while her brother's dismissive response made clear that her family support was conditional on her conforming to their expectations about appropriate social and economic partnerships. "You're risking everything you've built for a romantic fantasy that will fade once the novelty wears off," Michael warned, "and you'll be left with diminished social standing and a husband who can't contribute to your lifestyle or business interests." The conversation ended with Victoria realizing that choosing James would mean choosing authenticity over approval, personal growth over social positioning, and love over convenience in ways that would fundamentally change her relationship with her family and social circle. The decision-making process that Victoria underwent forced her to examine her deepest values and priorities, while considering whether her privileged lifestyle had prevented her from understanding what constituted genuine success and fulfillment versus mere achievement and accumulation. "What am I really afraid of?" Victoria asked herself during solitary walks through Central Park where she could think without the pressure of social expectations or business responsibilities. "Am I afraid that James isn't good enough for me, or am I afraid that I'm not good enough for him?" The question highlighted how her assumptions about social hierarchy had prevented her from recognizing that character, talent, and integrity might be more valuable qualities in a life partner than wealth, status, or social connections that had shaped her previous relationship choices. The more time she spent with James, learning about his artistic vision, his dedication to his craft despite obstacles, his dignity in the face of limited opportunities, and his genuine interest in her thoughts and feelings rather than her financial resources, the more Victoria realized that he represented everything she had been seeking in relationships without understanding what she actually needed for emotional fulfillment. James sees me as a complete person rather than just a wealthy woman, Victoria reflected, and he challenges me to be better while accepting me as I am, which is the opposite of what I've experienced in relationships with men who were primarily interested in what I could do for their careers or social standing. The recognition that authentic love required vulnerability, growth, and mutual respect rather than strategic advantage began to reshape Victoria's understanding of what constituted a successful partnership and a meaningful life. The public announcement of Victoria's engagement to James Rodriguez created a media sensation that transformed their private relationship into a symbol of social change and challenged traditional assumptions about class, talent, and romantic compatibility in contemporary American society. Today, I'm proud to announce my engagement to James Rodriguez, Victoria declared during a press conference that drew national attention. An extraordinary musician and composer whose talent and character have enriched my life in ways that transcend any consideration of conventional social expectations or economic circumstances. Her statement was carefully crafted to emphasize James's artistic accomplishments while challenging media narratives that portrayed their relationship as charity or social experimentation rather than genuine romantic connection based on mutual respect and compatibility. James has taught me that true sophistication comes from integrity, creativity, and compassion rather than wealth or status, Victoria continued, and I'm grateful for the opportunity to support his artistic career while learning from his example about what it means to pursue excellence despite obstacles and maintain dignity regardless of external circumstances. The response to her announcement included both criticism from social conservatives who viewed the relationship as inappropriate class mixing and praise from progressive commentators who saw it as evidence that American society was evolving beyond rigid social hierarchies that had historically prevented recognition of individual merit regardless of economic background. The planning of Victoria and James's wedding became a carefully orchestrated event that challenged social conventions while demonstrating how their relationship had transformed both individuals and created new possibilities for authentic connection across traditional class boundaries. I want our wedding to reflect both our backgrounds and our shared values, Victoria told the wedding planner she had hired, incorporating James's Puerto Rican heritage and musical artistry alongside the elegance that my social circle expects, but without the ostentation that characterized my previous events. The ceremony that emerged from their collaborative planning process included classical music performed by James and his conservatory colleagues, traditional Puerto Rican elements that honored his family's culture, and an atmosphere of genuine celebration rather than social display that had marked Victoria's previous entertaining efforts. James, will you play one of your original compositions during the ceremony? Victoria asked, I want our wedding to showcase your artistic gifts and celebrate the creativity that brought us together rather than treating your music as background entertainment. The request demonstrated how their relationship had elevated James's artistic identity from hidden talent to central element of their shared life, while creating opportunities for his family and friends to witness the recognition and respect that his abilities deserved from Victoria's social and professional networks. The guest list for their wedding reflected the social integration that their relationship had created, bringing together individuals from dramatically different economic and cultural backgrounds who had never interacted as equals despite living in the same city and sharing interests in music, arts, and cultural activities. Victoria, I'd like to invite Professor Santos from the conservatory and some of my former classmates who are still pursuing musical careers, James said during their planning discussions, because this wedding represents not just our personal commitment but also recognition of the artistic community that shaped my development and supported my dreams even when practical circumstances forced me to work in other fields. His desire to celebrate with people who had known him as an artist rather than a service worker highlighted how their relationship had restored his identity as a complete person worthy of recognition for his talents and character rather than just his utility as an employee. James, I want to invite everyone who matters to both of us, Victoria replied, regardless of their social status or economic circumstances, because our wedding should demonstrate that genuine relationships transcend the artificial boundaries that have kept people separated based on wealth rather than compatibility. The resulting guest list created unprecedented opportunities for interaction between New York's cultural elite and working-class individuals whose artistic abilities and personal qualities had previously been invisible to wealthy patrons who consumed culture without understanding the economic struggles of its creators. The ceremony itself became a powerful demonstration of how love could transform individual lives while challenging broader social assumptions about worth, talent, and the possibilities for authentic connection in a society stratified by wealth and status rather than character and compatibility. Today, Victoria and James are showing us that love recognizes no boundaries of class or circumstance, declared Reverend Maria Santos, James's former professor who had been ordained as a minister and who officiated the ceremony, and that the highest form of sophistication is the wisdom to appreciate excellence wherever it appears and the courage to choose authenticity over convention. The wedding vows that Victoria and James exchanged emphasized their commitment to supporting each other's growth and dreams, rather than conforming to traditional expectations about gender roles and social hierarchies that had characterized Victoria's previous relationships. "Victoria, you've taught me that recognition and support can unlock potential that circumstances had hidden," James said during his vows, "and I promise to help you discover forms of fulfillment that wealth alone cannot provide while sharing the artistic life that gives meaning to everything else I do." Victoria's vows acknowledged how James had challenged her prejudices and expanded her understanding of human worth. "James, you've shown me that true culture comes from the heart rather than the wallet, and I promise to use my resources to support not just your artistic career but the broader recognition of talent that exists in unexpected places and deserves opportunities that economic barriers too often prevent." The reception celebration showcased the musical collaboration between James and other talented individuals whose abilities had been discovered through the social integration that his relationship with Victoria had created, transforming the wedding from personal ceremony into cultural event that celebrated artistic excellence regardless of its economic context. "Ladies and gentlemen, James Rodriguez will now perform the wedding suite he composed specifically for this occasion," announced the reception coordinator, accompanied by members of the New York Philharmonic and musicians from the Puerto Rico Conservatory who traveled here to celebrate this union of hearts and cultures. The performance that followed exceeded anything Victoria had experienced at her previous cultural events, combining technical sophistication with emotional authenticity that reflected genuine artistic collaboration rather than purchased entertainment designed to impress rather than move audiences. The standing ovation that greeted the performance included tears, cheers, and expressions of appreciation that demonstrated how authentic artistry could create shared emotional experiences that transcended social and economic differences among audience members. "This is what cultural events should feel like," Victoria whispered to her new husband as they watched their guests respond with genuine enthusiasm rather than polite obligation. "Celebrations of human creativity that bring people together instead of dividing them based on who can afford to attend." The media coverage of Victoria and James's wedding influenced public discussions about class, talent, and social mobility in ways that extended their personal story into broader conversations about American values and opportunities for individual achievement regardless of economic background. The Sterling Rodriguez wedding challenges social conventions, read headlines in major newspapers that covered the event as both society news and cultural phenomenon. "Millionaire's marriage to janitor musician symbolizes changing attitudes toward class and merit." The articles emphasized how their relationship demonstrated that talent and character could be found in unexpected places, while highlighting systemic barriers that prevented recognition of abilities when they existed in people whose economic circumstances limited their access to platforms where such gifts could be displayed and appreciated. Victoria Sterling's choice to marry for love rather than social advantage represents an evolution in how American elites understand their relationship to broader society, wrote cultural commentators who saw their wedding as evidence of changing values among wealthy individuals who were beginning to recognize responsibilities beyond accumulation and status display. The positive response to their story encouraged other individuals to challenge social conventions that had prevented authentic relationships across class boundaries, while inspiring broader discussions about how to create more opportunities for talent recognition regardless of economic circumstances. The honeymoon that Victoria and James shared became an opportunity to plan their future together while discussing how their marriage could serve as a platform for addressing the social and economic barriers that had nearly prevented their relationship and that continued to limit opportunities for other talented individuals from working-class backgrounds. "Victoria, I'd like to use the recognition that our wedding has generated to establish scholarships and mentorship programs for students from low-income families who are pursuing careers in classical music," James proposed as they discussed their shared philanthropic goals, because talent exists everywhere but opportunities are still largely limited to people whose families can afford years of unpaid training and audition expenses. His vision reflected how their personal experience had revealed systemic problems that required institutional solutions rather than just individual success stories, while Victoria's resources could provide sustainable support for programs that addressed root causes rather than just symptoms of inequality in arts education and career development. "James, I want to do more than just fund scholarships," Victoria replied, her voice carrying the determination that had built her pharmaceutical empire but now directed towards social justice rather than personal enrichment. "I want to create a foundation that provides living stipends, performance opportunities, recording contracts, and career mentorship for artists whose talents have been overlooked because they lack social connections or financial backing." The vision they developed together would transform Victoria's wealth from a tool of social positioning into a mechanism for dismantling the very barriers that had nearly prevented their own relationship, while James's artistic network would provide the expertise and authenticity needed to ensure their programs served genuine artistic development rather than just charitable display. The return from their honeymoon marked the beginning of a new chapter that would test whether their personal transformation could survive the practical challenges of integrating their dramatically different backgrounds while pursuing shared goals that challenged the social systems that had shaped both their lives. "Mrs. Rodriguez," said Margaret, Victoria's personal assistant, still struggling to adjust to the reality that her employer had married the man she had previously supervised as janitorial staff, "the board of directors is requesting a meeting to discuss how your marriage might affect company policies regarding employee relationships and professional conduct standards." The awkwardness in Margaret's voice reflected the broader social confusion that their relationship had created among people who were struggling to recategorize their understanding of social hierarchy and professional boundaries. "Margaret, please schedule the meeting and inform the board that my personal relationships will not be subject to corporate oversight." Victoria replied with firmness that established new boundaries while acknowledging that her choices would require ongoing navigation of situations where her married name and husband's background challenged conventional expectations. "Also, please arrange for James to have office space in the executive wing where he can work on his compositions and coordinate the artist support programs we'll be launching through the foundation." The practical integration of James into Victoria's professional environment would require sensitivity and creativity, as they figured out how to honor both his artistic identity and her business leadership role without diminishing either person's contributions to their shared enterprises. The establishment of the Rodriguez Foundation for Musical Excellence became the concrete manifestation of how Victoria and James's relationship had evolved from personal love story into social catalyst for addressing systemic barriers that prevented talent recognition and career development for artists from economically disadvantaged backgrounds. "Our mission is simple," James explained during the Foundation's inaugural press conference, "to ensure that musical talent is recognized and supported based on ability and dedication rather than family wealth or social connections, and to create pathways for artistic career development that don't require artists to choose between creative fulfillment and economic survival." The programs they developed included full scholarships with living stipends for conservatory training, mentorship relationships between established artists and emerging talents, performance opportunities at venues that had previously been accessible only to artists with wealthy patrons, and recording contracts that allowed artists to document and distribute their work without commercial compromise. "We are not just funding individual careers," Victoria added. "We are working to transform the classical music industry so that it reflects the full diversity of human talent rather than just the narrow slice of society that has historically had access to elite artistic training and career opportunities." The Foundation's approach addressed both immediate needs of individual artists and systemic changes needed to create sustainable equity in arts education and career development. The success of their first year of marriage and foundation work demonstrated how authentic love could serve as a foundation for meaningful social change, while providing both individuals with fulfillment that transcended their previous understanding of personal achievement and success. "James, I've never been happier or felt more useful than I have since we've been married," Victoria told her husband during their first anniversary celebration, "and I think it's because we're using our different strengths to create something that's bigger than either of us could accomplish alone." The statistical results of their foundation work included dozens of scholarships awarded, hundreds of performance opportunities created, and measurable increases in economic diversity among students at major conservatories and music schools. But the personal transformation that both Victoria and James had experienced seemed even more significant than their quantifiable social impact. "Victoria, you've become the person I always believed you could be," James replied. "Someone who uses power to lift others up rather than to maintain artificial separations between people, and someone whose sophistication comes from understanding and compassion rather than just wealth and status." Their relationship had evolved into a partnership that honored both individual talents and shared values while creating new possibilities for how privilege could be used responsibly and how love could transcend social barriers to create authentic human connection and meaningful social change. The legacy that Victoria and James Rodriguez were creating through their marriage and foundation work began to influence broader conversations about wealth, responsibility, and social mobility in American society, while providing a model for how individual relationships could catalyze institutional change. The Rodriguez Foundation has demonstrated that private philanthropy can be both personally meaningful and systemically transformative when it addresses root causes rather than just providing charity, wrote social policy analysts who studied their approach to arts funding and career development. By creating pathways for talent recognition that bypass traditional gatekeepers, they're proving that excellence exists throughout society and that the main barriers to achievement are opportunity and support rather than ability or motivation. The Foundation's success attracted attention from other wealthy individuals who were seeking ways to use their resources for social good while finding personal fulfillment through meaningful relationships and authentic contribution to human welfare. Victoria and James's story had evolved from personal romance into proof that love could be a revolutionary force when it challenged assumptions, broke down barriers, and created new possibilities for human connection across lines of class, culture, and economic circumstance that had historically divided rather than united people with shared interests and values.